is open to the idea that when you're curating a show, you can recommend books and films that they keep adding. So we have a long list of books that we wanted them to add, and one of the books which we have got in is Women in Design by Anne Macy. I've not completely read it, but I found it really very interesting in the way it's approached again, the conversation of women. And some of the other books, so Madhiben's books which are downstairs in the exhibition, if you see the drawer where Sujata Shankar, Architect Sujata Shankar's works are displayed, they both have shared details of books being available to purchase. And the books which have come as a part of Architect Meenakshi Jain's exhibition, the family has decided to donate them to Earth Shira. So it's a very interesting cyclic process going on. You can purchase books which you might be interested, write to the authors. Books have come in and books will go out from here. So even Resurgent Modernism came to us because of this reading session that we planned. And hopefully there will be more copies of it in the Shira. Resurgent Modernism. No, hopefully in the future you will get a copy.
Right now.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, we can start.
So, I want to start by asking you about what you thought of these 5 pieces of text that we read. Do you think there was any kind of conscious effort to project women architects in a certain way, or what do you think about this? Any of you want to answer? It might have been different in the different pieces of text. There might be something similar, like a common image that all the 5 pieces of text are trying to project. Do you think there was anything like that? Or in any piece of text where it was more stronger than others?
One thing that was sort of interesting to me is that all people sort of seem to be very keen to differentiate the context of India from the West. That seemed to be a common theme. So, this conversation.
Any other observations on how, let's say, Namita Singh was being written about compared to Meenakshi writing about herself?
I don't know, I mean, it's not the comparative analysis is still taking a little bit of time to get into, but the highlight was, I don't know, for me the highlight was that piece of Vinay De Silva, where the physical attributes of her being beautiful, intelligent and traditionally dressed were sort of put in focus. And I mean, it's interesting because I don't know if Doshi or Korea would have been written in the same light, like with salt and pepper hair and the tall something. I don't know. I mean, it's a it's a description that I'm trying to find if that exists anywhere.
But in documentaries, at least, I'm not sure about writing, but in documentaries, especially Louis Kahn has been described for his Frankfurt.
They've been described as architects who basically drawn women to them. Like the way she was described as drawing the men to her.
Yes.
But the traditional thing is interesting. That is a traditional dressing.
Yeah.
But I guess it reflects on the time period, so maybe.
I think it was a choice also. I mean, one of the most iconic photographs of Vinay De Silva is her in that sari on the construction site and with the others of the CM conference and those ones as well. So I don't know, it's just a thought that.
And when you put it like that, I'm actually curious, is it because of those limited imageries and archives that a representation takes forward, right? Whereas in the other case, especially again coming back to Corbusier and the ground glasses, it's a choice of portrayal that you have chosen to stay in the black and white and the glasses, whereas in the other gender, I mean, I'm already doing this and that. It's because you've only seen the iconic image. Whereas I don't know if Zahadid has been spoken like that because she's seen in so many more forms, more represented.
Zahadid also was associated with a lot of wearing of black and carrying herself even quite like a man many times to compete with the male architects. So there is a comparison around dress style. There's also Odette in France. I'm forgetting her surname. She dresses in a very iconic dress, like black dress always. She representing an architect. Odette?
Odile Deck.
Odile Deck.
Yes.
Odile Deck, yes. So there are these, ideas about how architects and women architects and male architects dress.
Just one additional point, I have to pull in the oral history project and Architect Ayodh Kamath's oral histories, because the fact that you're talking to family members or friends and colleagues who are seeing her or fondly remembering her very soon, there is continuous reminder about how she dressed, and I don't know if there is an interpretation of what it meant, but there is a remembrance that she liked dressing. Yeah, I think there is also a fondness of that she liked dressing a certain way and how comfortable she was in those ways on site. So it's happened even at that live scale for us.
So this whole idea of a woman being, transforming herself and making herself more masculine, I feel like, in a very indirect way comes out in Namita Singh's book. So some of the excerpts that I've chosen on her liking this kind of spatial cleanliness over decoration, or that it's not just fine art, it's brick and concrete, and embracing modernism, which is a kind of a masculine projection in some sense. It doesn't come out directly at all, because when you read it, it is about her work and it is about how good she was at her work. But indirectly, all these little these little examples, they kind of make you think a little bit about it. At the same time, there is this thing that Alka Pandey writes on her personifying the creative feminine, which is kind of quite contrasting compared to the other pieces that are written about her. So that's very interesting. Ayodh, since you're here, it would be nice to hear from you. What was going on in your mind when you wrote this piece of text, and did you specifically, were you conscious at all about a certain kind of image that you would like to project of your mother? Because it's very different. I have not seen this kind of writing about other architects where you're bringing in that whole philosophical dimension about politics and spirituality and other things guiding her work, and comparing her to Chandrasekhar, who's also a Gandhian. So what went on in your mind when you wrote about it?
Honestly, it was mostly just I don't know, because I started archiving my parents' work pretty much almost 2 weeks after, a week after they passed away, literally, because I had to finish all the incomplete projects, and I was sitting in the office, which is 40 years worth of stuff just lying around scattered here and there. So I just started archiving, and then I was getting very worried about how much time and energy I'm putting into archiving. So I said, okay, something productive has to come out of this. Otherwise, what am I doing this for? And then so I said, okay, I should start writing stuff, because as I was going through the things, a lot of thoughts were going on in my own head. And because it was COVID, I really didn't have a chance to mourn their loss at all, because it was very isolated, that whole time period. So then writing was part therapy, part justification of sort of wasting time, because most people didn't understand what I was doing. Like even the chaprasi in the office was just like, क्या meeting क्यों नहीं ले रहे लोग, client क्यों नहीं आ रहे, क्या हो क्या रहा है यहाँ पे? He's very worried. And even he's still stuck around with me. His last employee is still there. But even last week he asked me, आप मुझे काम से निकाल तो नहीं देंगे ना? मैं मतलब ऑफिस चलेगा. That से काम चलेगा. पहले की तरह नहीं है. इसमें दो बड़े आर्किटेक्ट 10 प्रोजेक्ट इकट्ठे संभालते, मैं अकेला बैठा हूँ. Like so no one seems to understand the process of archiving, its value, why, and that was making me also worried. And it's like, okay, no one, everyone around is just like, no one understands what I'm doing, so I should do something. So then at least now I get to come, so that was mostly the reason. I have no idea. So there's no real thought beyond. It was very personal. So yeah, sorry, that doesn't answer your question, but that's what it is.
Yeah, so my question was more about when you thought of writing, how did you think, where did you think you should start? I mean, and how did you think you should write about all these connections with Chandrasekhar's philosophy and all of this?
No, so that actually, the one thing is that people have been writing about my parents' work ever since I can remember. So for me, it was a big thing of, okay, what more can I add? And then people much more senior than me, much better qualified than me have written about them. So it's like, okay, what do I have to contribute here? So then I just like, so then because of that, it was a personal partly. So I said, okay, so and then, so from then one thing, so then I started thinking about what has been written about them, and then what I realized is then I tried to find things which have not been written about them. So one of the things which was a very important part of their work, which I think architectural writing in general lacks, is a focus on architectural detailing and actual construction of the building. Like people again they talk about philosophy and this and that, and especially in the Western writing on architecture is hardly, and or if they go into the detail, it's all about some kind of very Carlos Capas over design. Makes no sense and has no relevance to anything in my opinion. So I said, okay, what can I? So I said, first of all, what is of interest to me? And having worked with my parents for so long, or for also quite a long time, just like, okay, what have I learned from them? And for me, that was architectural detailing came out as the most important thing that I learned from them. Sort of how to actually detail a building, how to design a sill, how to design a lintel, how to do a flooring pattern, that kind of stuff, which is no longer seems to be going increasingly out of fashion, especially with things like BIM and metrics and all. You press a button, half your working drawings are done. So no one actually spends time on those kinds of things anymore. So for me, that felt very important. And then to highlight the importance of that, I wanted to say, okay, so I just thought that, okay, each chapter would be structured around one detail of one project. What stood out, stand out to me is the most important detail of certain key projects in their career. And then I wanted to highlight the importance of architectural details. Then I said, okay, I want to talk about how that one particular detail of any of these different important projects, how that ties together so many different things, whether it's sort of politics, site visit, gender, religion, caste, what all these various things, or technology and sort of Indian history, economics, whatever. In each of these little, within one detail, you can see all the influence of all these things. So for me, that was the thing. And what's actually weird for me is that because my parents practiced together, even though individually they worked on, like one project would usually have one of them in the lead position and the other person, but it was never completely isolated. So even if either one of them was the lead, there would always be, the other person would always contribute, and maybe you can corroborate this. I may be biased here, so in that, what's actually harder for me is to separate or to say, okay, how, if I'm talking about gender, then okay, this is my mother being a woman architect. If I'm saying X, Y, Z, then what about my father as a male architect? And you don't, even saying the word male architect, the male architect feels weird. So I just like, what do I do? So actually, it's personally it's easier for me to write about the woman architect is much easier to write about than the male architect because there's no such exactly that's default when you say architect is generally male architect. So I'm just like, okay, what do I do here? What I'm finding is that I'm actually having to define the role of male architect only, and it exists only because there's the female architect there. It's only in relation to that the male architect or the thing, and that even that I even have to talk about or address that issue is only because of that. So which is very weird. I don't know.
It's interesting.
I have a question.
No, it was bringing me to my next question or the next comment, but go ahead.
I have a question in relation to this text. What I found.
Just switch it on.
What I found particularly striking in this text is about the relationship with your mother's practice and the tantra that you bring in, the tantra angle, and how you mentioned that it's linked to the ecosystems. And for me, tantra ecosystem immediately brings the feminine aspect, not the feminist, the feminine. And therefore, the question is that you begin, very interestingly, you begin your text by saying, I'm an atheist. So, what is happening to the masculine and the feminine in the architecture profession is probably a question that I'm asking. Or what is happening, do you see yourself relating to that aspect of your mother's relationship with tantra or spirituality or anything for that matter?
No, I don't. That's why I'm saying I'm an atheist. I'm saying this is a disclaimer. Like I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm coming up from a very external sort of outsider's perspective.
Yeah.
I don't understand that stuff. I'm literally the only book on tantra I read is Vidyadhar Hijia's Yogini Cult in Temples, which I literally read about 6 months ago in order to write this. So I have no knowledge, no understanding. These books were always there on the shelves, but I never had any interest in them. They were always there. They exist on the shelf, at home or in the office or whatever. I never read until right now. So I don't. Which is why I keep saying that okay, I don't know what's happening there.
And the counter narrative to that is again Jyoti Subramaniam's the sister of Ayodh Kamath. Even contractor, sorry, what's his name? PP Singh. So across the gamut of people we've spoken to who are like, she's very spiritually aware, she's very conscious, there is a sense of it in the way she designs. And they have very real examples to talk about it, so it doesn't even feel validated, it's not unfounded. So what would happen when you read this piece where you disconnect from the subject, but there are much more lived experiences of other representations which actually connect it back to, yes, maybe she was thinking like that, kind of thing. And the mystery remains.
I mean, I have a personal anecdote of a discussion with my intern therapist. I was a senior architect. And there was some discussion about something in the office, and she said that design comes to me, it's a feminine, and like it was a manifestation of God. She didn't really mean feminine, but I believed her. I was probably impressionable, really young, but I really wanted to have faith in what she was saying, that it's a design is a manifestation of everything that is right, and that's the thing that comes on paper. You just have to be like a vessel, and so it almost talks about a feminine energy in a way that it just comes. It's a miracle, and then it just flows out, and it's like this. You don't have to do much. So I'm like, that's the way to do it. So you have to be really together and really spiritually be there to be that vehicle of manifestation of that energy where everything just comes together, and I feel like the way she used to design phone, I remember she used to sit on the table with and it was always progressive. It used to always keep having layers on layers on layers over from concept to final working drawing, where she would keep scribbling on top of it, and probably some of the sketches are they are somewhere, like it would keep manifesting, and the lines would just become more and more intuitive and smoother, and it would all feel like everything was just coming together, and the evolution of from where it started with programming and just fitting the pieces together, and then how everything would just mold together. It was like that was mind-blowing.
And this is the point where I think I also asked the question, which is what I sort of founded this session discussing with you all. When I was listening to these perceptions about Revti ma'am, two at least stark ones. One which was associating her with the sense of spirituality and consciousness, and there's this other one where she's very strong-headed and she wants, once she's drawn it, she knows what she wants and she gets it done. I was like, how do you want to be represented? Is there a choice once you are not there? Is there that agency of the missing person? Or does their narrative become all about perceptions of those who are writing and remembering?
I feel like there are certain choices as probably women architects that we make. Either we try to sort of isolate ourselves from our femininity or whatever we associate with being feminine, and the decoration portions of it, and we are like, we are architects, not women architects. On the other hand, there are people like Revti who don't shy away from it. It is very much a very, very strong part of the language of how they are doing their work, they have done their work. There is no shying away from it. It is an integral part. If it's not there, it's not their work. It's not shying away from being, it's not saying that I'm a woman architect, but it's who I am.
It's who I am, yes.
That's my work. Which is the difference. I don't know. That's where I think the difference is in how we make that choice in sort of representing ourselves in our work, probably, or sort of either stepping back from it or embracing it completely.
Yeah, so I mean, what I see in all the pieces is that there is some sort of show of strength, whether it is in the form of this kind of an energy, or like in Namita Singh's case, the kind of independence that she worked with and the choices she made. There are also pieces that says it's not just monumental but also residential. So you're taking away the woman from being associated with the domestic and taking her into the monumental space, which is usually the man's domain. So do you think this, and there is also this whole narrative of breaking shackles, whether directly or indirectly. So you're saying that there is an energy that is coming from within, like let's say while talking about Minute De Silva or any of the architects, there is some sort of breaking of some sort of shackles. And while you say that it was easier for you to write about a woman architect than a male architect, do you think that happens because you can't not write about all of the social dynamics and personal struggles and all these things? You can't just disassociate that with the professional practice. Do you think that's the case while writing about women? If anyone wants to comment about this. Like, for example, in Namita Singh's book, there is absolutely no real mention of, any kind of really personal experiences or any kind of social challenges. But through the narrative that you are constantly re-establishing the fact that she made it in a man's world. I was just having these thoughts. Any comments on this? Or do you agree that happens most of the time?
Yes, at least for me, again, it comes back to having done so many oral histories where we saw that the narratives were constantly intertwined. Because this was happening at home, this is what's happening at my practice, or because this was happening at practice, this is what happened at home, or teaching, or any other aspect of life. But so this is not just to differentiate between domesticity and practice. This is to say that maybe it's the wiring that you look at your narratives as a more networked relationship rather than you knew it outright there and then that road has been followed. So that's very evident in the oral histories that we collected. In fact, that is why it also became a little difficult to work with them. That's something I shared on the opening of the exhibition, that given 3 months to put on an exhibition, it would have been a very bad effort of trying to build a narrative in 3 months with such complex material. And hopefully we'll take a little longer to try and find ends which can be tied together or written about. But until then, they're themselves very interesting episodes, if I might call it so, which people need to listen and decipher along with us, hopefully. So that's how I would agree. And I think I also asked this question to Namita Singh in the conversation that I did with her, that why not the personal? And we don't need to play, because I think she has said it very clearly that she didn't want the author to engage with the personal aspects while writing the book. I wanted the book to be about my architecture. While I have a complete contradicting conversation through bio diaries where I step in and I say, oh, but your project, your work has a lot of stories to tell, why don't we start documenting them? And the team had already perhaps thought about it as well, where they said, yes, we should do that, it should not be just another architecture monograph. So I think there are choices which women architects themselves are making. Definitely when it comes to representation, it's not just about the person who's invited to write or comment about.
Right. So, with regards to the two essays that you read, there's no mention of Chitra Vishwanath anywhere. Not that she started bio or anything. So that was very different, because then there was it was completely different from the other pieces where the architect was mentioned, or in Nilakshi's case it was completely personal. So the I had come out quite strongly. So did you specifically choose the essays in that manner, or how did that turn out to be in a
I think, I mean,
monograph?
it's definitely a matter of humor when I say that, okay, I am invited, I have to follow what she says, right? But I have written only 3 pieces. There are other 27 authors, even they don't choose to write. So I think the process itself spoke for where we were going. That it's not, I mean, so while everybody else's bios are there at the back of the book, her bio is there where you know that she found it by me. That's all. It's just the process. So, I mean, what I said earlier, that when we started off, we said, yes, it's about stories of so many people who have come together, believed in a value system, and taken the challenge forward. And of course, when you start off, you don't know whether it will sail through. So, the whole idea is to show that in 30 years, you have explored, experimented, and you have arrived at themes. So, to take that credit all on oneself was not something she wanted. As I said, I had to sort of follow through that. But still, neither of us, none of the authors also ventured out in writing. Maybe there were 1 or 2 essays which perhaps glorified or pedestalized her a little bit, and that's where we took an editorial take. Not again in a very authoritative way, but where she would just write back to them, or I wrote back to them as a curator saying that we want to write more about your experience with Chitra rather than saying that Chitra has done her best. And that's what everybody sort of agreed with, and it came through. So no, there was no choice. And then coming back to the process or the sequence of essays, everybody wrote, and then the sequencing or the form of the books really happened. So we had this now kitty of 30 odd essays, because every author, even what they proposed and what they wrote, there was a transformation, of course. It was that open-ended. And eventually we said, okay, then what falls into then, now, and emergence. And then we tried building a relationship, just like you'll see down there in the exhibition. It might not make sense. You might say, why is this essay after this? And I really don't, at least 3 years down the line, I definitely don't have an answer. That day I might have still explained it to you. But which I was already doing it with the exhibition also. Why did I put this author next, this architect next to this quotation? It is not going to make sense 2 days later or 2 months later, but in that moment, it felt that there was a continuity, and we went with it.
Yes, sure. So we have some short recorded pieces by some of the authors themselves, which I would like to play. So the first one, we did two interviews, one with Namita Singh and one with Meenakshi. So I'd like to play one or two recordings of theirs. It more or less addresses this whole idea of, in Meenakshi's case, how she would like to project herself and what struggles she went through while writing the piece. And also in Namita Singh's case, like Ishita just pointed out, that she didn't want the personal out there. But when asked about, let's say, the aspect of being a woman in practice over the early years, especially how has your experience changed? And does gender even affect your practice? Her take was very different. So just like to bring out these contrasts. And I think after that, I'd like to end with a small, again, 2-minute recording of Mary Woods and a small piece that she has specifically sent for this session. Unless anybody else has anything to comment on any of the readings, anything that strongly came out. For me, there were many things that came out. The projection of women as mistresses of the architectural universe. I thought that was quite something. And this whole idea of an architect's personality being associated with their work. Because I remember seeing in an exhibition somewhere in Germany about Mies and about this, what is the house? Tugendhat House, yes. And how the family met up with Mies and was just so impressed with his personality that they just gave him the job. You know, so it's written that he was so impressed by the way he spoke and his whole personality, and that's why we gave him the job. So they hadn't really looked at any of his work or anything like that. And that also comes out quite strongly in the pieces of writing about, you know, what kind of a person were they. So I thought that was quite interesting.
One thing I observed is that none of them really, at least in some of them, one writing it came out very clearly that they didn't want to be associated as women architects, but as Indian architects, which was also an interesting sort of.
Yeah. The national identity was, they associated themselves more with the nation than with their gender. Or I don't know, maybe that, like Shruti said, they didn't want to have that tag and kind of isolated themselves from that identity. It's weird because in Minette De Silva's case, the description that is written is that she stood out because of her identity. Of course, because she was from Sri Lanka, the traditional dress, but also because she was able to charm the men at the AA with her beauty. Versus the other case in Mary Wood's essay. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to see this kind of contrast. There's no real answer, I think, but the fact that there is a certain negotiation and there is a certain struggle when it comes to how to represent, or how does one want to represent themselves also.
So my understanding is that instead of a contrast, there is a spectrum of choices, which is very interesting. Where you're being written about, who is writing, and then what part of you, which identity. So it's not as black and white as, you know, I've not been written about or I've been overtly written about, but very interesting choices that different women practitioners have been making. So one of the books which we are not discussing, maybe because of at least my own lack of knowledge, is Brinda Somaya's book. But that itself would break this conversation in interesting ways. Is my reading of the book, because I've not completely read it, but also when I've heard her speak at forums and so on and so forth. And when Rutraj, who knows her, Mary Woods, who knows her well enough, and then Nandini, who knows her well enough, have written about it. Is there a sort of a very forthcoming? For me, it's very similar. It is in my head the way Zadul would have wanted to be written about, right? And I think you get what the nuance I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas here we constantly struggle. मेरा नाम नहीं आना चाहिए, मेरा नाम नहीं आना चाहिए. I'm like, नहीं आएगा आपका नाम. I'm talking about Chitra, very specifically. Or in Mary Wood's book, where a lot of people have said it's not so important for me to be recognized. So there's very interesting spectrum that one could get into if one was researching.
You're right. There's a spectrum and there are choices, and the good thing is that the choices are unfolding differently now. So if you look at even Inaksh's video, what she's saying is that for my sister, 10 years later, the narratives in the offices and practices will be even more like probably different. So
Maybe when we play, I think that might also trigger any more thoughts.
Yeah.
Quick question based on this discussion. So I can't help observing that the only person who sort of talked about based on their was Minute December in terms of her wearing sari XYZ and whatever. But again, I can't help sort of see, is it only a correlation or is there also a causation that the author writing that is not Indian? Because Mary Woods is the only non-Indian author thing we discussed. So is it just because of that? So it's like if a Sri Lankan was writing about Minute December, would that be an issue? Would that have come up or not? I don't know.
That's a very interesting observation.
Yes, and I say that because so many women architects in India, from what I have read, identify themselves specifically as Indian also, which so I then sort of meet more, arguably more than as women, and a lot of them also do not associate with Western feminism, from what I read about them. So because of that, I can't help but ask that question. I don't know. I don't. You know a lot more about this than me, so
But I feel like playing a trick here where I put it back in your quote that because Architect Kamath's presence in the way she dressed is also something, not because it came up in the oral histories. Before the oral histories, at least when I've seen magazines or flipped through, that's something I've also sort of picked on, that yes, she had a style. So is that something that you imagine that the book needs to get when you write? Because the way oral histories are talking about it, it seems like it's a very important part of knowing her.
I'm too close to it, because I she's my mom, I don't know.
That's why I said it's a trick question.
But that having been said, now that the issue came up, I've been thinking about it, and what I found very interesting was the change. So in college and stuff, and in school, college and all, my mother would wear jeans, bell-bottom, very, very Western clothes. But then as soon as she's finished college and started practicing, I think it was, I don't know if it was either a conscious choice or it was, or she was forced to then take on Indian clothes. But then again, it was not traditional clothes like other women in my family, like my grandmother and other people would wear. It was because again, those were very traditional saris and South Indian saris and things, so which again, living and practicing in Delhi may not necessarily have made sense. So I think she had to consciously make choices, and then once you do that, you end up, and if you are a designer, then you end up having a style, whether you like it or not. So, and that also changed, because initially she would wear for saris, and again, not mixture of different, the saris from all over India, not sort of traditional South Indian saris, not Kanjivarams, not specifically everyday South Indian traditional saris that other people in my family would wear. But then I think once Fab India came, and for a phase, then for a time she had a Fab India phase, all her clothes would just be from Fab India. Then as the quality declined, so then it became other things, and in the middle she came back to saris, but then she didn't do saris and blouses anymore, and she did saris and t-shirts. Then after that she went to salwar kameez, kurta pajama, salwar kameez kind of thing, and then she did one house for someone in Kashmir which did not get built. That's a whole other story. Why didn't get built? Very interesting. But then her winter wear became Kashmiri sort of firans and other things. And so it was always changing. It was never static.
I'm sure it wasn't community silver as well.
Yeah.
Probably just
Yeah.
those
We just
pictures.
don't have enough pictures.
Archives, limited archives.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think this whole thing of Indianness also comes with its own layers and complexities. When women in India don't associate with Western feminism, I think there is a whole societal aspect to it also. Saying we are not like them kind of thing, or that we don't start where they start, I don't know. But and the whole dressing thing, I think the closer you are to your to your land, I think the more kind of connection. But it is interesting to think that women architects seem to project that more in some sense.
I have a slight different take on that also. Maybe, I mean, I could be wrong, but at least 20 years back, if you wore a sari, you would get respect.
Yeah.
So if you have to go to site and work with people or work with clients, if you wore a sari in your office, you get equal respect as your spouse versus maybe jeans or something else. So
That's because you're seen as not corrupted by Western culture. Yeah. All right. So I'll just play a small clip by Nilakshi and Nastasi, and we'll end with Miri. So this is when I asked. Okay, my question is also there. Especially when you're talking about women architects. Do you think they're relevant to be spoken about in architectural writing while writing about their work or their professional lives? It is. It's very, very important. I'll tell you about my current context. I'm in Guwahati. Whenever I'm in a social gathering of our fraternity, there are a lot of women architects, a lot of them. But they all are partnered with somebody, okay, which is fine. There's no problem in that setup. But what happens is there is always this dissolving of credit, okay, and that bothers me at some level. I have faced that too, because there is always this prime and primary and secondary. People might be doing it unconsciously, but it's happening nonetheless. Like many a times I have personally experienced, it's a project, we have gone to the inauguration of the project, and the clients and everybody associated with the client's family or team, they address Abhinav and Abhinav's team. Very few instances are there where I am acknowledged equally. So what happens is, I think writing as a media can play a role. I think again going back to Madhvi ma'am's book where she had interviewed and dug out all the stories of women architects through generations. That book is powerful because then you start self-reflecting also that okay, I didn't know this. I didn't know this person did this work. I'm just talking about the freshers, the new architects, upcoming architects of the city. But yeah, definitely. I would love it if there is a newsletter even in Guwahati which talks about only women architects. They can obviously say that the project is in collaboration with XYZ, but that platform that the credit could be shared equally, Definitely. So just one more clip about representing yourself. And so my last question is, what were you already mentioned that it was quite challenging to write about yourself. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What was going on in your mind when you chose to write? And in what way did your personal and social life become an important part of the narrative?
I think the biggest challenge was the lack of habit of writing. That's definitely first, because that what happens is, even if you are used to writing, academic writing is different, right? So when I was structuring the paper and it being a personal journey, it felt like you're jotting on a journal. And to make it academically sound without sounding like a victim, because see, that's another problem. When you're writing your self journey and you're talking about a sensitive issue like gender, and you're primarily talking about your experiences on a negative light, most of right, So at some point, the entire writing almost sounds like you're playing a victim. And you don't want to come across like that to readers also. So I think these were different challenges, yeah. And I think lastly, I kind of, my entire focus was dividing my professional journey till now into segments as a student, as an intern, the beginning of the onset of my journey in the industry, and incidences from there. And in fact, honestly speaking, I've also heard people of my colleagues gone through the paper that you should learn to let go also. I've heard that advice that these are very, ये तो normal बातें हैं, ये तो होता ही है. So you're supposed to let go up to the point, because in 2023, if I'm still writing about 2011 and something happened back then, so it's an issue. I'm not letting go. That's how people see it too. So I think to put all of that together, there was a constant self-analyzing, self-doubt, trying to frame it in an academic format, and at the same time maintaining the balance with being honest. Because I think the last push from Obi Ma'am really helped, because as I mentioned, I had given up. I actually told her that it's too much, and it's I'm actually playing a victim in this entire paper, 3-4 pages of it, and it sounds very weird. Nobody will ever read this. So ma'am was like, we want you to be honest. Just it's like vomiting on the paper. Do it, And I think that push helped. I was like, I'll just take your word on that and do that. So.
So that was Neelakshi talking about her struggle. We have some recordings with Namita Singh also. So one of the questions that Ishita asked was about how do you feel to be written about, and do you relate to whatever is being written about you? So let's just listen to what she had to say about it.
I mean, this is a good point to move to the question where I'm asking about how do you feel to be written about? Because in the foreword, Dr. Pandey writes about you in 3 different connotations, which are important. One, she mentions your work, or you working through a sense of creative feminism. Then she goes on to associating you with the role of a Vishwakarma. And then there is a mention about your signature style, which is to blend modern and traditional. Do you relate to either of these? Do you feel differently? So how do you feel when you read?
So that is how the way he looked at it. Vishwakarma is somebody who created, the celestial being who is associated with creation. And so perhaps let's use that word. I have not analyzed what Alka has written about. She's written what he means. She's been very closely associated with most of my work. But she's an art critic, so she sees it with her own glasses, the work. especially the last point, because I mean, a little while back you did mention that you didn't want to perhaps associate yourself with any one way or one style, but there is still a mention of the signature style. And hence I was wondering if you feel the style comes from the ethos of the village, that there's something about them which has common, that means it is there's so much natural light and the spaces thrown into each other and the way it relates to the outdoors, to the landscape. If there is nothing available, then I create my own spoken, landscape area. So those things and the use of material, brick being a very predominant material is my natural stone, brick, natural material predominantly there. So these are the common things which make it, and so many have told me that who met people first, or there was very little interaction with them, that when they went to this or that house and or this or that building, they knew it was my building and they confirmed that yes, it is my building. So this is what is the common things. They might not look at.
There was this, and then there was also this, which was
And the aspect about being a woman in practice over the early years especially, and then has it changed? Has your experience changed? Does the gender affect? My parents sort of brought me, of course, sisters, I'm the eldest. My parents never made us feel that they didn't have a son, and they brought up like they would have brought up any son. All of us have careers, all of us studied a lot, and were made financially independent. So I wasn't aware of any gender obstacles when I started working. I was most unaware of me being, female or weaker gender. So I wasted all my time very unconscious of my gender. If they felt something, I don't know, but I never felt from their interaction also that I was really less than a man architect, or I was really different.
So, yeah, and this is very interesting again going back to oral histories, because this I did it only, this is an interview only for the book, just wanted to clarify, I've not done an oral history. But when you listen to some of the oral histories in the portal, a lot of them actually say this, and that is another place where I realized keeping the critical eye open, that the idea of gender or the concerns about gender also come from a space of understanding privilege. And eventually it sort of takes you to inquiry into nepotism in architectural practice, whether male or female. And the whole idea that gender is affected or is a concern doesn't apply to all, even when you think about female practitioners in leadership.
yes.
And that's definitely a matter of privilege. That yes, you did get affected, but do you still worry about it because others might get affected by it?
Yes, definitely. All right, so I think we've reached the end of our discussion, and
we can continue over
we can continue over tea downstairs. There's some tea that has been arranged for everyone.
I didn't check.
So great, thank you so much for joining us today, and I think it was a wonderful discussion that quite a bit of the spectrum came out, And it's just food for thought. I don't think there are any answers to this. It's just something to think about. While so the next time you read a piece about anybody, uh, you can think of this whole idea of representation and whether it was a choice or what were the conditions under which the architect was represented in a certain way. And because this is something we don't really think about much when we read, we're really looking for content and things. So this is a different angle, different perspective to think about the piece of writing. So I just like to end this session with a small piece by Mary Woods that that she sent Ishita just specially for this session. Ishita?
Yes. I mean, she has certain situations going on because of which we couldn't connect online and have the similar interaction. So when she felt better, she said, I'm sending my remarks, which can be read out.
Right.
And I think this is the second time it's happening that somebody's reading out her paper in India or her note. And I think she's also appreciating, so this is, I'm telling you, the back end of emails, that instead of, but what you raised, that, instead of me reading it out or saying something about Indian context and getting the names or the pronunciations wrong, how does it feel when somebody within the forum from the country is reading it out?
Yeah.
Last year it happened at Matter, at the conference on modern heritage.
Right.
And similar responses.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read out remarks on the occasion of exhibiting stories of women of architecture and the launch of Women of Vastukala, Women of Indian Architecture by Mary N. Woods, Professor Emeritia, History of Architecture and Urbanism, Cornell University. The writer Joan Didion once observed, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live. Stories are about our very survival. They are the keys to our past, but also our future. And they are the heart of architecture and the design disciplines." As the architects, writers, and archivists who organized the 2022 conference, Architecture and Its Stories in Dublin, affirmed, architecture has the capacity to absorb and to transmit stories. Architecture orients us in the world. Its elements of walls and ground, of roofiness and footprints, frame and structure every episode of our lives. It is a storybook of the past and the present, of public and private, of facts and feelings. Stories, it seems, can help us to make sense of the environments we have already created, and to imagine the ones we will need to create in the future. Thus, it matters whose stories about architecture and design are told and what stories are erased and forgotten. It matters how these stories are told. It matters how they are cared for and preserved. It matters where they are kept. It matters who can use them. And it matters who can add their stories to them over time. And the archive contains the blueprints for architecture and its stories. The challenges of telling, collecting, and preserving architecture and its stories are existential. And they are what Ishita Shah and you, as Curating for Culture collaborators, have addressed so thoroughly and impressively over the last 3 years. Today, we celebrate their achievements through exhibiting stories of women of architecture in Ahmedabad and the launch of their digital archive, Women of Vastukala. The archive is about ways of knowing and ways of forgetting. It can enshrine or it can erase legacies. While women have been the keepers and guardians of the archive, they have struggled to find a foothold there for their own work and lives. Women still account for only a small percentage of the subjects in leading Western archives like the RIBA, Canadian Centre for Architecture, and Avery Architecture Archives and Drawings at Columbia University. And it is due to Ishita Shah that CEPT, one of India's first collections devoted to modern architecture, planning and design acquired Hema Sankalia's papers from her family. I am very honored to have my book on women architects in Mumbai and Delhi included alongside Professor Madhuri Desai's inclusive account of women architects across India. When I first began researching it, I was quite fortunate to have the work and support of Professor Desai to build on. Pioneering feminist historian and academic, she generously shared her knowledge of Indian modernism and its women architects. In 2003, There were no institutional archives devoted to Indian architecture or architects. The Council of Architecture did not even keep statistics about the number of women architecture students and practitioners. We had to rely on oral histories. And this meant searching out and gaining the trust of professional colleagues and family members for the first generation of women architects, like Perin Mistry and Pravina Mehta, who were no longer living. Intertwining the roles of historian, archivist, and curator, as you have done through Curating for Culture, is crucial. One of my greatest regrets is that I did not talk with Dr. Malvika Chari, Pravina Mehta's sister, about what to do with the invaluable photographs of family, buildings, models, and drawings that she so generously shared and allowed me to publish. When Pravina Mehta died, another family member disposed almost all of her office materials. Dr. Chari's photographs were the only remaining physical traces of Mehta's practice. And I don't know what happened to them after Dr. Chari died in 2019. Institutional archives raise thorny questions of autonomy for collections like your Women of Indian Architecture, devoted to diversity, inclusion, and community. Dr. C.S. Lakshmi, noted scholar and writer, founded Sparrow, Sound and Picture Archives for Research on Women in Mumbai in 1988. Regardless of a woman's class, caste, and community, she insists every woman has archived something through acts of assertion. I don't think there is any history that is not worth being seen and retrieved. Thus, archiving the histories of representative women as well as exceptional ones is important. And expanding your archive to include women as builders, artisans, and users, as well as designers and patrons, is the next step I know you're considering. Lakshmi is devoted to Sparrow as a community archive. She resisted its becoming part of SNDT Women's University. I want these archives, she said, to have complete autonomy. Yet, such autonomy comes at a price. Precarity in terms of funds, staff, and space, and Women of Indian Architecture faces the same challenges as your community archive. As my colleague, Oya Rieger, former Cornell librarian for the Digital Humanities, and now consultant to the Mellon Foundation's Ithaka project, notes, even digital archives need ongoing funding and expert staff to support and sustain their collections over time. Here she advises partnering with institutions while maintaining acquisitions, autonomy, and data sovereignty. And the Mellon Foundation has supported such community or institutional partnerships to build diverse and inclusive collections. Utilizing open source software, Rieger stresses, it is also key for community-based archives. Mukur2, a software technology, was developed with and for indigenous and post-colonial communities to manage and curate their cultural heritage. It strives to help these communities recast cultural materials and with their own histories and experiences. Finally, recruiting the next generation of curators and archives, as well as creating creators of content, is also essential, which is why your workshops, exhibitions, and other educational programs are so important. As Donna Haraway wrote in her Staying with the Trouble, in findishly tongue-twisting prose, which I am delighted Ishita will read, so I won't mangle it. It matters what matters we used to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots, not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, what world makes stories. Ishita and all of you at Curating for Culture have stayed in with the trouble and brought to light many still untold stories of women who made architecture and design matter through their lives and work. You have made stories through words and words through stories. You have knotted the knots, thought the thoughts, described the descriptions, and tied the ties. And most importantly, you've created pathways for other individuals and communities to contribute to the archive through participating in oral histories, exhibitions, and workshops. Here, they can tell their stories, share and preserve them, and make them visible to us all. You recognize making diverse and inclusive spaces is the only way to enrich and sustain the archive, its stories, and our lives going forward. We are all in your debt. Thank you.
part which gets very awkward when you're being written about. But yeah, so thank you, Ramya, for reading that out, and I think we must thank Archila and the Feminist Collective in Architecture for coming on board to make this session happen. Thank you so much.